The scriptures say that their wisdom is like silver and gold. And the way you get silver and gold is mine it. The way you do it is a lot of hard work. It's easy to not study to show yourself an approved workman. But the one who doesn't should be ashamed of themselves. I want to talk to you about 8 things the biblical writer thought you knew. And I want to do that because I think what happens when we open the Bible is we don't understand that the biblical writer has a problem. No matter which of the 40 writers of Scripture you're reading, they all have the same problem. They think you live, when they live, where they live, how they live. They have no idea that you're going to fly over in jet planes and look at the remains of their houses in archaeological holes several thousand years later from the seat of an air-conditioned bus driving by. They have no idea what the New World is. They've never been to Florida. And they have absolutely no concept of Western history as we know it. So when you look into the Bible, the person that is living at that time is writing to you as though the methods that they have used to learn learn things are familiar to you. At the time of Jesus, a person learned in the local synagogue, and when I say person, I mean man. A woman learned from her mother, but a young man went to the synagogue and he got about the level of a 5th grade education. He could read and write at about that level. A woman could read and write if she was taught that by her mother. And the important thing is this. The very first thing that they would do, because they didn't have any textbooks that they could take home, was they would memorize portions of Scripture. That is how they learned. Memorization was the backbone of their learning. So they would do it this way. Teacher would come in, teacher would read, teacher, 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 student, 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 teacher, 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 student, and it was a drill and skill. I would say it, you'd repeat it. I would say it, you'd repeat it. I would say it, you'd repeat it. And you would learn the Scriptures that way. How could you do your homework? You would go home having memorized the portion. And the portions were broke differently than you know them. You have chapters and verses, but your chapters and verses don't come till 1,500 years after Jesus. At the time of Jesus, Genesis was only 11 sections. And chapter 1 to 2, 3 was the prologue. And then 2, 4 started the beginning of the first section. And then there were 10 stories and they all began exactly the same way. This is the story of, in Hebrew, toledot. This is the account of, or here's the story of. 10 times you'll see it in the book because that was the division. So how did you know where things were? You memorized them. You memorized the whole thing. What was the book of the Bible that was most often quoted by Jesus besides the Psalms? Anybody know? What was the first book of the Bible you would have memorized? Any guesses? Good, class, Deuteronomy. Why? Because it's the Constitution. Who knew that if you want a good student population to become good citizens, memorize the Constitution first? How shocking. So what Jesus did was in his local synagogue, learned constitutional law, and he spoke more often Deuteronomy because everybody knew Deuteronomy. What are you, stupid? You didn't go to school? Everybody memorized that. And so he could spout off a portion of Deuteronomy and everybody else could fill in the background, just like if I said, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. You're going to know it, and I know that you know it, and so I don't have to worry about you knowing it. I only have to give half the phrase, and that's why sometimes when Jesus is speaking, he only gives half a phrase. Everybody else knows it. They all memorized it. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that an Middle Eastern thinker is not like a Western person. All of you are Western in the way you think. In fact, if the Bible is your mother, Homer is your father. The Iliad and Odyssey were the ancient world's kind of Emily Post etiquette. And what you know of life is largely framed around a biblical worldview and a Homeric worldview. I don't have time to describe all that, but let me just say there's a division between the way people in the East and people in the West think. So a Middle Easterner thinks differently than you. You and I were raised to think that the most important thing, the first thing that we thought was important was form. Form. What do I mean by that? Well, what do they look like? We actually judge people by how they look. Does everybody sort of agree with me here? That looks are important in our society? Does anybody think looks are unimportant in our society? So we think something is what it looks like. If it looks dumpy, it is. But maybe, have you ever been surprised that somebody you walked up to and you thought, boy, they look nasty and they turn out to be really nice? I mean, or they look scary. You know, this big guy looks really scary, turns out to be this, kind of gentle giant. Here's the thing. You can't judge a book by its cover is something we say, but we do it all the time, don't we? Okay, now, if I were to take you on a plane, I could fly you to Athens, and it would be fun because I love Athens. It's a neat place, got great food. And we could go to the Acropolis. Can all of you picture that mountain-like Acropolis that's sitting over top of Athens? And the Parthenon sits up on top of it, the Greek temple. And on the side of it, as you're looking at the front gate, there's the Propylaea, the gate, and on the other side there are these caryatids, these ladies, and they're all perfect in form and they're holding up the porch roof. And there are these very classical Greek women in togas, kind of in stone, holding up the roof. And if you went inside to the Parthenon, I could take you around back to the museum. You go down the stairs and you would see Zeus, and you would see Jupiter, you'd see Neptune, you'd see all of these intricate gods and goddesses, because in the West, you are what you look like. If you want to teach people values, you show them form. And so there are these wonderful statues that tell you all of the mythology of Greece. Here's the thing. I can show you Greek history by showing you Greek battle scenes, mosaics, sculptures, form. Now, if I take you to Israel, we fly a couple more hours and we go over, we land in Tel Aviv, we get out, we go out to the bus, and I can take you all around Israel. And I want to, by the way. But I can take you all around Israel, and here's the thing. I can't show you a single statue of Moses. Joshua standing there with Moses like, there are none. There are none. You know why? Because Middle Eastern people are aniconic. Icon, image, aniconic, against image. So in Exodus 20, when it says you will make no graven image that you bow down and worship it, some Christians are like some Jews who will say, no, you can't have any images. But others will go, yeah, you can have them, you just can't worship them. For an aniconic person, they can't have images around. For an iconic person, they tell their story through images. So one of the ways the biblical writers different than you is they would never have a Bible with pictures in it. They wouldn't have a statue anywhere. Statues are for Canaanites and Philistines. Israelites, we don't do statues. But here's the thing. If you want to pass on your history and you can't do it in art, how do you do it? Literature. So what did the Hebrews leave us? The Bible. We have the written word because we don't have the pictorial word. The Greeks left us precious little writing of their mythology until much, much later in the Periclean Athens time of the great 500 BC Athenians. We have mostly statues and very little writing. So, difference number one between you and the biblical person. You think in form, they think in function. Let me see if I can help you to understand that. To a biblical writer, you are not what you look like, you are what you do. In Hebrew, by the way, if you learn the Hebrew language, the nouns are a piece of cake. Kisei, chair. They're easy. You go to learn the verbs, they're a nightmare. There's a form of a verb. I thought about doing it, I was going to do it, but I didn't do it. That's a form of a verb. They have more forms of verbs, they'll bury you in verbs. Say, here's what I want you to know. In the ancient Hebrew language, ran John to the store. It's most important what happened, then who did it, then who had it done to them. So you didn't start off with what we start off with. What's the most used word in the English language? I, followed by me. What does that tell you about the English language? It's egocentric. It's the world as defined by me, because I am the center of my world. But the biblical world, the center of the sentence was not the noun, but the verb. Ran, jumped, warred, beat. So in the ancient language, it's what somebody did that was more important to define who they are than what they were in appearance or what they said. What's important is that in the biblical world, you are what you do. Now, why is that important? Because when God described himself, he didn't do it in Western terms, he did it in Eastern terms. He said, "Do you want to know who I am?" Guys, I had 2 educations. Maybe this will help you. I had an education that was Christian, and then I had an education that was Jewish. Okay? In my Christian education, I learned the following definition of God. See if it matches yours. God is a spirit being possessing intellect, emotion, and will, who does things according to his own good pleasure, who therefore brings all things to pass by his active or permissive will in perfect harmony with his attributes. How'd I do? You think I could pass the quiz? Then I went to my Jewish classes. God is a mountain with a cloud at the top. You can see the foot of the mountain, what he does, but you cannot see above the cloud who he is. The rabbis taught it was inappropriate for you to try to define God, because that's you being Lucifer-like, trying to be him. So, for generations, you didn't even speak his name. The reason we don't know how to say Jehovah or Yahweh or Yahuwah, the reason we don't know how it's said is because nobody said it. Why? Because you didn't say God's name. That demeaned his name. And so now, the rabbis taught, you see the foot of the mountain, what God does, but you don't define him. Up in the cloud, there's only things you can't see. So, for instance, the Middle Eastern way of describing God is, you want to know who I am? I'm the God who brought you out of Egypt. How about this one? Matthew 11. John is in prison, remember? Sends disciples to Jesus, and they say, "Are you the Messiah, or should we look for another?" And Jesus gets out his chart and says, "Well, actually, I'm the second person of the Trinity. Can I actually define?" No, that's not what he does. What does he say? Anybody remember? "Go and tell John what you have seen that I have done. The lame walk, the blind see." You want to know who I am? Look at what I did. I am what I do. That's functional thinking. Okay? Now, that's the first way you're different than a person in the Bible. But a second way is that you have, you own stuff. In the biblical world, they're related to stuff. In the Western world, we own stuff. What do I mean? I can say, this is my Bible. This is my cup. This is my book. These are my notes. In Hebrew, you say, Yesh li hasefer, there is to me the book. In other words, not I have the book, I possess the book. It's there is to me the book. What's the difference? It's a slight difference, but it means there's a book and there's me. We're both owned by God, but we're related to each other right now. It's not mine. I came with nothing and I leave with nothing. Nothing's mine. I have a relationship. Look, you guys know this. Your house isn't your house. The bank owned it most of your life. And even after you pay it off, guess what? Your parents will move out and it'll be somebody else's house. And you'll drive by and go, "There's my old house." It was never yours. You've had a relationship with it for a while. Whatever car you drive currently will not be your car a decade from now unless you are really, really hurting. Okay? And so you'll have a brief relationship with this automobile that feels like it's yours, but it's not. So in the Middle East, I get on an airplane. I fly to Amman, Jordan. I get off the plane. We get on a bus to get taken into the terminal. I turn to the driver and I say, "What is your name?" Now, it's a trick question. For an Arab who's an Easterner, that's a trick question. Because when he was growing up, he was son of Mahmud. And so everybody in his neighborhood called him son of Mahmud. But then he grew up and he got married and he had a son, and now he's father of Ahmed. So in his old neighborhood, they say, "Son of Mahmud, how you doing?" In his new neighborhood, they say, "Father of Ahmed, how you doing?" His name's George. No one ever calls him that. Because in the biblical world, you are not defined by who you are, you're defined by who you're related to. You are in the relationship. It's not what you own that defines you. It's who you're related to that defines you. Now think about how this plays out in our theology. God says, "You want to know me? I'm the God that brought you out of Egypt." Or, what's the other way to know me? You want to know me? I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm known by who I'm related to. So, God is known by relationship, and He's known by action. There's an old story about Alexander the Great. There was a young man that had signed up, a Macedonian man, as a hoplite soldier. And he went out and he fought for Alexander against Darius the Mede. And he wanted to go out and he wanted to fight. And when he got in the heat of a battle, this young man named Alexander hid behind a rock. And his men saw him. Now, the Greek army had so little a place for people who were cowards. And so he was brought first to his captain. The captain brought him all the way up to the general. The general threw him down in front of Alexander the Great, who was sitting at the end of the victorious battle on a throne. And here comes this young man named after Alexander the Great, and he's thrown on the ground, and Alexander looks down at him, having read the charge that he had hidden from the enemy and under fire, hidden behind a rock. And Alexander said to him, "Young man, what is your name?" "Alexander, sir." "Young man, what is your name?" "Alexander, sir." "Young man, what is your name?" "Alexander, sir." And he said, "Change your conduct or change your name." And he sent him away. If God is known by what He does, He's also known by who He's related to. And when you say the word Christian, what you are saying to the world is, do you want to know my God? Watch my life. That's what you're saying. In Middle Eastern terminology, I can walk into a shop. I can go into a shop in Jordan and I can see, by the way, every shop in Jordan has the same picture on the wall. It's a picture of Abdullah II, the king. You always put a picture of the king. And I'll walk in and I'll look at the picture of the king and I'll go, "Wow, the king looks really good in that picture." And he'll go, "Thank you." Like it's a personal compliment. Because that relationship defines you. Now, with us in the West, a guy gets off of a flight in California, shoots down a bunch of tourists, and we go, "Yeah, he's probably a Californian. They're all nuts anyway." We don't even own our own countrymen. We can barely own our own president and Congress. And so reality is that in the biblical world, you are who you're related to. When you look for a definition of God, it will be God will explain Himself in who He's related to and what He has done. Those are the Middle Eastern ways to explain yourself. Now, there's a third way in which you are different than the biblical thinker. Biblical thinkers think in tribal terms. You think in individual terms. You are you. You are not your sister. You are not your brother. You are insulted when people compare you to your sister or your brother. You are you. I am myself. In the ancient world, in the biblical world, when a person died, you prepared the body. Do you remember how they prepared a body? They would lay out the body and wash the body, and then they would put spices and something. Does Crisco mean anything to you? Something like a buttery Crisco they would put all over the body, and then put like pieces of plants, and they would attach to the body and then wrap it up. By the way, why are you doing that? Why are you putting spices on the body? Why would you spice a dead body? You're not making a stew. I mean, come on, what's going on here? Okay, the thing is, if you take, this is not real. I don't know if I'm not supposed to say that, but this is not real. But if this were a real tree and I pulled the leaf off of there, the leaf stops being a part of the life of the tree, right? Because they separate it. If I take that leaf and I put it on the back of my hand and tape it to the back of my hand, it will die and it will leave dead skin on the back of my hand. In other words, death promotes death. So what you do is you spice the body to cause the body to break down faster. You're not doing it for the smell. Nobody else is in there. Okay, the rest of the people that are in there, they're not going to complain. Trust me. So you put the body there and it breaks down, and over 18 months, you go back in and that body will be nothing but bones and a skull with a hairdo. Okay? I have been into a bone washing. The Greek Orthodox Church still does this, where they will put the body of grandma in the floor of the church, And then a couple of years later, they'll bring the body of grandma out, and by now all the flesh is gone, and now it's just the bones of grandma in a dress, with a smile, with her glasses, with her hairdo. And they literally separate the bones and put them in a small box. In the ancient world, they would gather up the bones and put them in with the fathers. When Jacob was gathered to his fathers, it meant they gathered them up and put him in the repository in the big open area with all the bones of his fathers. By the way, you all started together, so you end all together. You started as the same chemicals swimming through the same body, and now you end up as the same dust. So in the Middle East, people were buried collectively in one big tank. Everybody was put in together until the Greeks from the West. And when the Greeks came, then you wanted individual burial. You wanted your own plot of land. I am not just family Smith. I am Randall Smith. I shall be buried as Randall Smith. Now, in the Middle East, they open up the same family hole and put body on body. Here, we all get our own box. They don't bury in boxes, they bury in shrouds. You break back down into the soil. We bury in boxes. I want my own box. I want it to be polished, like somebody's going to see it 6 feet under. You know what else is weird? We pad the inside of the thing. I mean, seriously, stop and think about that. That's as dumb as putting a stereo in there. It's not like the person in the box knows. Mine's like, make it as cheap as possible, honey, because I ain't going to know. I'm not there. Absent from the body, I'm present with the Lord. Here's my point, because I do have a point. The biblical world thinks tribally, not individually. So, the good of the many outweighs the good of the one. As a result, for instance, you could attack a city, and maybe you would be called upon to be a sapper. Anybody know what a sapper does? A sapper is the guy that goes in and digs under the wall to cause the wall to collapse, and then the casters come in and throw the wall pieces and the body of the sappers out of the way, and then the infantry piles in the breach in the wall to take the city. Sappers, what are they, depressed? No, they're not depressed. They go in and they pull the bottom of the wall out, and many of them die, and it's an honor to do so. Why? Because my family is honored by my sacrifice. In a tribal society, the whole family goes with you. Did any of you ever watch, like on the news, you see like an Arab kid standing out in front of a tank throwing rocks at the soldiers or something, and you're thinking to yourself, where's his mom? His mom prepared him lunch and sent him to the protest. She's not trying to save him. She believes that it would emasculate him. It would make him less of a young man if he couldn't get up there and get shot for the cause. Because in a tribal culture, it's the good of the many, not the good of the one. Now, in our culture, who are the heroes? It's the Lone Ranger, the Superman, the one who stands up against the many. But in the Middle Eastern culture, it's the family that's the hero. They're structured differently. They'll blow themselves up so that they can help raise the honor of their family. That doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but to the Middle Eastern mind, it makes perfect sense. The Bible is written by Middle Easterners. It's written from the perspective of people where the good of the many defines and outweighs the good of the one. And the one is defined by the many. I am only here because of what my fathers have done. Now, there's another way that the biblical writer is different than you. How many of you frequently get lost when you're on a journey? Okay. What are you supposed to hold up on the map? What faces up? North? If you don't know this, it might be the reason you're getting lost all the time, okay? Okay, so north is up. But for the biblical person, east is up. Now, how could I possibly know how Abraham held a map? It's very easy. It's in his language. In the Middle Eastern terms, if you read the Bible literally, we're going to talk next time about translation. Do you want the Bible translated for what it says or what it means? Because here's what it says. If I'm facing to the east, it says I'm facing to my face. Bapane, where the sun rises. Because the sun rises in the east and I wake up in the morning facing the east. My tent is open toward the east. Why? Because that's my alarm clock. When the sun comes up, I do. I get up. How do I know that's true? Because in the Bible, do you remember that Abraham chases after Lot after he is taken captive? by the kings of the plain. We're going to read about it in Genesis. It says, and he goes up to Hovah, which is to the left hand of Damascus. But in your Bible, it'll say to the north. See, if you're facing east, the left hand is to the north. What's your right hand? South. And where is west? On your back. You have to understand that on your back is where your trouble is. What's west of Israel? Big body of water? Mediterranean Sea? Okay? And where do the problems come from? They come from the sea. Did you know that the word yam, the word for sea in Hebrew, is also the word for chaos or trouble? Middle Easterners don't do swim teams. Why? They're desert people. Desert people don't do swim. They just don't do it. So in the ancient world, behind them was the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean is where the Greeks came from, and the Philistines, and all the troubles, and all the chaos. So in front of us, the sun rises. Behind us, we have all of our problems. What I want you to see is that they define the direction in east-west terms. They don't trust the west, it's behind you. They love the east, it's in front of you, and their left hand is north and their right hand is south. That's what the biblical writer wrote, but you got the translations north and south. Let me give you another difference. Big difference between you and the biblical person. You live in a world of convenience. They live in a world of survival. Okay? Let me put it this way. In the Bible, there's no such thing as a bad rain. Showers of blessing. You need the rain. For us, we have things like rain on my parade. Because we are a people pledged to convenience. They are a people trying to survive the end of the week. One of the big differences between you and a biblical person, they knew what it was like to be hungry. You think you know what it's like to be hungry. They knew what it was like to be hungry. Some of you, you're going to walk in and you're going to look in your parents' kitchen and you're going to say, there is nothing to eat here. And I could look in cupboards and I will say, well, there's shredded wheat. I don't like shredded wheat. Well, there's popcorn. I don't want popcorn. There's lunch meat. I don't really feel like having lunch meat. There's plenty to eat. You just said there's nothing to eat. What it means is there's nothing you feel like eating. You understand that much of the world doesn't have a choice? That a good part of the world got up and had rice today, and guess what they're going to have tonight? Rice. And guess what they're going to have tomorrow? Rice. And guess what they're going to have the next day? Rice. And maybe a little bit of fish. Maybe. That's much of the world. We live in a world where we get to be all that we can be and have it our way and walk in and say, I don't like pickles on my burger. You have to understand that for a person, children were not abused to work for the family. There was no choice. In the ancient world, it took 5 people to raise enough crops for 6 people to eat all year. Think about that for a minute. If 5 people work the farm, we'll have enough for all of us to eat and enough to sell in the market for 1 more person. That's not a lot, is it? That's why people didn't move out of poverty. Because basically they were subsistence livers. And by the way, if you tucked away enough for that 6th person every other year, when you had a famine year, you had enough to make it. Do you know what the oldest recipe in the Bible is? Not in the Bible. The oldest recipe in mankind is? It's how to make beer. You know why? Because bread went bad. And that was the way you survived the winter. The fact of the matter is people needed the caloric intake just to stay alive. You and I, we sit down and go, you know, oh, it's a bunch of guys at a ball game having a beer. Those guys, in antiquity, they were trying to live. They were just trying to get enough calories around. Look at us. Do we look like we're having problems with enough calories to live? Americans are not obese because there are just a lot of choices or because we just lack incentives to get. We got gyms. I mean, here's the weird part. We will drive our car over to the gym and then walk on something that doesn't go anywhere rather than walk over to the gym. Okay? Why? Because our life is structured in convenience terms, not in survival terms. There are very few of us worried about how to survive. We are sitting in a room where we can control the temperature to be whatever we want it to be. And no one's going to be happy. Someone's always going to be cold and wearing a jacket, and somebody else is going to be sitting there. It's so hot. Okay, let me give you another one. Here's the difference between them and you. They live in their own time. What do I mean? I mean, for a biblical person, the past is the present. Forget that. For a Middle Eastern person, the past is the present. Every time you start talking about Gaza and Israel, people go back into historionics. They right away go back into history and start telling, well, these people came here then, because everything about what's happening now is about yesterday and the past. In the Middle Eastern world, you live, well, let me say it this way. Your past is in front of you. You can see your past. Your future, where's it at? It's behind you. I want you to think about this. It's in our language, but we don't say it this way anymore. It happened before means it happened when? In the past, right? It is before me. Where is it? In front of me. See, it's still in our language, but it's not how we think. We think our future's in front of us and our past is behind. The biblical person thought exactly the opposite. The biblical person said, you can see your past, you can't see what's back there. That's your future. So Lot's wife is leaving Sodom, and what does she do? She looks back. And every Western commentator will say she's worried about her past, and Jewish commentators will say she's wondering of her future. Same story, two different ways of telling it. Why? Because we don't think the same way. Okay? There's entire tribes in Africa who receive Jesus into their throat because they don't believe the heart is where the center of emotions is. They think the throat is. By the way, in Hebrew, it's the bowels. It's here. Yes, it's true. Your heart may skip a little bit when you have to get up and speak, but it's often a little bit lower that you're starting to really feel it when you have to get up and speak, okay? So it's interesting because, let me give you one. I got two more. Difference number 7 is their front page was filled with characters and issues from their time. Ours is filled with characters and issues from our time. If I say Hillary Clinton, you feel something. Don't tell me what it is. I don't care. If I say Barack Obama, you feel something. Don't tell me what it is. Here's the thing. When they said Herod the Great, they felt something. Now it's just a word on a page. It doesn't mean anything to us, but it meant something to them. They felt something about it because the text was written about them. So when you open up the Bible and you start reading and it says King so-and-so and prophet so-and-so, these were gripping stories of their day, and now they're just dead words on a page. Part of my job is to make those people live for you, to help you understand how they think, what's motivating them. The text is written about people that were alive at the time, and everybody knew about them. For us, we don't really know about these people. One last one. The common speech of a person in the biblical period was memorized Bible. They had Bibline blood. Cut them anywhere and they bled Bible verses. What do I mean? I mean, when they went to school, they memorized the Bible. You're going to be shocked to know that in America, we don't. You're going to be absolutely surprised that most Americans, the most they could tell you is Jonah and some fish and maybe Daniel in a lion's den. They don't know most of what's in the book. But in the Bible, you could actually cite a piece of one verse and expect everybody in the crowd to finish it for you. It's called a remez. Remez means hint. And so all I would do is I would just start into something and I would say part of the verse and you would know exactly what I was talking. Let me give an example. Let's just suppose that that Peter's back there with Ben, and between them they only have one pencil. And the problem is that Peter really, he really wants to use the pencil, but Ben, he's just not going to share the pencil. And so, honestly, Rebecca turns around and says, look, it is like for God so loved the world. Now, for God so loved the world that he did what? Gave his only begotten son. What is she telling Ben to do? What is she telling him to do? Give him the pencil already, okay? So here's the point. The point is, you knew what I meant, but what I said had nothing to do with what I meant. So unless you know the rest of the verse, you're going to be sitting there clueless. By the way, when you read Jesus and when you read Paul, they will cite pieces of Old Testament verses that honestly have nothing to do with the discussion whatsoever. There is no way you can make that about what they're talking about unless you've memorized the rest and understand the point. That's a remez. Jesus walked around in a world where he could drop half a verse, and 14 verses later, you would know the point of what he said, and he didn't have to tell you that. And what are you, stupid? You went to school, didn't you? And so he could anticipate that. Now you have commentators doing unbelievable Gumby-like gymnastics trying to make that verse fit into what Jesus was saying when it has nothing to do with it. You got to go 14 verses later to actually figure out what it is he meant. And you go, well, that's dumb. No, it's not. He's educated. We're the ones that are stupid. They didn't go to school where we went, when we went, how we went. They did it their way, and their text reflects that. By the way, what is one of the most famous methods of teaching used at the time of Jesus? What did he like to do that got the disciples kind of miffed at him and said, you got to stop doing that? Parables. The word mashal is a word for a story that has, it's a World 2.0 story that has a World 1.0 meaning. It's an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, with a spiritual meaning. And so often Jesus tells a mashal, and he wraps it in details. But here's the thing, don't make your theology from the details. He's just, the main thing is the main thing. That's all he's trying to say. And so often people get lost in the details on it because they don't understand that in their world they talked the way they talked, not the way we talk. The content of their speech was biblical. Now, if I walk around speaking in biblical proverbs, no one will understand what the heck I am saying. Why? Because we've distanced ourselves very carefully from the time of our foundation of our country till now, so that the majority of our people probably never actually open a Bible. And the Bible today among politicians becomes like Shakespeare. Everybody quotes from it, nobody actually reads it. Everybody acts like they know what it says, but nobody actually does. And so the objective of the student is to take the biblical record and take what they said in their world and pull it over into ours. Set the text in its type, understand the meaning of what the text and the word and the sentences are to the person who wrote it, and then analyze it by squeezing it for timeless truths and principles. And we're going to learn how to do that over the next couple of weeks.